Genghis Hexy. Notice the Hexy giggle. Let's wrap up Agincourt. This is kind of fun. The game plays smooth. It plays fast. So there's not really there's not game turns, so to speak, but you do have a time track, which affects whatever the scenario says who the timed player is. That's the one that it affects. And it's usually the opposing player is the one that actually makes the time track dwindle down. Didn't have to worry about in this one. It started at 12 and I got it down to 8. So there were still 8 more track markers on there that I could have gone down to end the battle. Didn't matter. As you can see, my Brits, my Englanders are out of their abatis and they were pushing the French. These bowmen, longbowmen, which is kind of cool because I just watched a documentary about how the bodkin arrows from these bows probably wouldn't have affected the steel that the knights were wearing. The steel armor. Not the crap armor that they had before, but what they had these Frenchies wearing. So, I don't know, it's one of these detective documentaries I watched about Agincourt, about how this potentially, why the French lost so many was because of the mud and the heavy armor they were wearing. Once they hit the ground in their armor, they were having a hard time getting out of it because of the suction of the mud, etc., etc. And then, of course, Edward, or King Henry, once he thought that he was being completely encircled by another major French force, decided to kill all the, so to speak, POWs they had after the fight. Anyhow, I don't know anything about that. I'm an IT guy. So once these bowmen just kept retiring the French forces, which you can see back here. Now there's no more room to retire anybody else. Doesn't matter because the game's over. But if another unit had retired, there's no place for them to go other than on the standard. So they could have got one more unit back here. But anything after that, if there's no adjacent hexes or the standard hex is empty and a unit can't retire, that means they're eliminated. So, and I'll show you the eliminated pile here in a second. The finally decided towards the last few activations for Henry and Thomas, and I was going to get Edward, Duke of York, out. Start advancing because we had the French get 30 flight points. Once they hit 30, they're done. Well, I was in the 20s. I'd gotten in over 20 with them, and I decided, you know what, let's push. So with all these longbowmen having a range of 3, or you move them up, if they're within 2, they get a +1. If they're adjacent, they get a +2. Well, they didn't need to move adjacent. They can just sit back and shoot. And once you get a unit disordered, you hit him again, you might eliminate him because the rolling for fire results against, you're never going to be able to see it. I'm going to turn it sideways, sorry, and the light's bad. See, if you're firing at a disordered foot unit and you roll a 7 or higher, they're eliminated. There's no retire, they're dead. They go to the dead pile. And a lot of the casualties were caused by that. Not to mention that King Henry himself has a +1 charisma and a -1 effectiveness in shock attacks. There's no cavalry on the English side. French had a bunch of it, but it didn't really prove to be anything because they would charge in or the units would move in for shock adjacent. The minute they move adjacent to a long bowman or a missile unit, the missile unit gets to reactive fire at them. All right. And I believe it's only once per activation that an enemy archer unit can fire reaction fire. So it was just, you can see Henry's guys got disordered. All right. They're not now because they recovered. Then they went on the attack and they got a continued attack and did some devastating damage because Henry's such a good leader. There's a disordered guy right there. That's it. They never lost anybody. They probably had 3 or 4 disorders over the fight of the battle because of their defense position. But the French, it was just non-stop disorder. Then disorder again, retire. Then you have to use a free activation to activate the banner or the king standard, which this thing has a cool role in this game. And then once you get a free activation on him, you can remove all the retires, and then your flight points come down. Okay, they come off, and then your flight point track moves back down. So I was doing everything I could to get that flight point marker down, but the last activation with Henry and Thomas surging forward and the archers coming up, it pushed them to 30, so they won't get their other turn. But man, what a fun game. This thing moved pretty quick. So this is kind of the introductory for the Men of Iron. Let's look at the casualties real quick before I start talking about this game. So there's your casualties over there. All right, all French. They're all of that's eliminated, okay? And then you get, and they had a leader that was killed too. Let's see, who was the leader? Let me pull this up to the camera here. Who did we get killed? He got killed in shock combat. This is David Rambarise, whoever. Anyhow, he's dead. His replacement took over, who is pretty much just as worthless as he was. So, and you get flight points for retired units. You get flight points for eliminated units. You get a certain number of points. And like I say, think of them as victory points. Only the problem is the flight points go to the side that took the casualties. And then once they hit their peak, which is set for the scenario, then the game's over. They lose. Okay. All right. So this one's out of the Men of Iron Tri-Pack. This is from the actual Men of Iron game. It's just a small footprint, one mapper, big hexes, big units, 30 to 40 counters on the board, a couple of Caesar chits that you can draw, and really that's about it. And like I say, a 12 segment general track for this one here. Flight points of 14 for the British, 30 for the French. The English are sitting on 0 because they don't have anybody retired, they don't have anybody eliminated. All right, and all their leaders are good. So like I say, this thing plays pretty cool. And I kind of like the system with not having a turn track. And, you get that, once one side fails an activation, the other side activates, and it's called a free activation, where you don't have to roll for activation for a leader. But that's the only time you can use your banner to unretire units adjacent to it. And you got to do it, because if you don't, they get stuck there. And then, like as you saw here, it's filled up now. So, and then plus you need to get those units back in. So it don't matter if they're fighting way the hell up here, and your banner's back here, they retire, they go right back. It says to move, kind of like old BCS, where you get a retreat, certain units to go right back to the headquarters. Well, this is the same thing. You pick them up, you move back there adjacent to it or with it. And then you get a free activation on that banner. You retire, you unretire the units. Then when if the formation gets lucky to activate, then any units that are disordered can be flipped back over. So it's got a pretty cool system, I think, where you can keep the battle going, where you can eliminate units just by chasing them away, and they don't have a place to go, or you can just flat out eliminate them. Not a ton of rules, a couple little subtle rules that you got to pay attention to, with your missile units, which ones can move and shoot, the pluses to them. Had to go find it, but they didn't have. There's some archers over here, just regular archers on the French side, and they weren't in the list for missile fire, but there's another chart somewhere. And keep it in mind that they can shoot 2 hexes, and at 2 hexes, they don't get any modifier, and at 1 hex, they get a +1. So it was pretty easy to remember after that. And they are covered, though, in your strength matrix, which is another rule. You notice there's no strength markers. I think I said this earlier. So if you get 2 units attacking 1, that's a strength of 2 to 1. So they would end up with a +1 in their die roll modifier for having 2 attacking units against 1. Don't be disordered. Don't get disordered by archers or missile units right before you shock attack, because that brings a terrible. You're going to get -2 on the die roll modifier right off the bat. All right, and then you get somebody like I say, Henry over here, who that unit he's with is an elite unit. They have a -3 already, and then you add in Henry's -1 effectiveness, or if he's attacking, you add in his +1. Well, if he's on the defense, you're looking at -4 on the die roll against the French attacker already. So, good system. A lot of fun. Simple to play. Agincourt, Men of Iron Tri-Pack. This is part of the Men of Iron game. Yeah, this is part of the Men of Iron game. Also has Infidel and Blood and Roses in it. We're going to wrap this one up. English victory, Agincourt, as it was back in 1415. Quick play, smooth play, a lot of fun. Get it out, play it. Hexy loved it. Talk to y'all soon.